There are roughly 65 million golfers in the world, and fewer than 1% of them are scratch. But most golfers believe that they are playing a completely different game, flawless, birdie machines. But that belief is costing you strokes. Scratch golf really isn't sexy. It's not magical. It's just less messy. In fact, most of their rounds are quite boring. And if you believe the myths, you're probably chasing the wrong goals and sabotaging your own improvement. In this video, I'm going to explain what scratch golf really looks like and how it can change the way you approach your game, and more importantly, whatever handicap goals that you have. Hi, my name is John Sherman. I'm the author of the best-selling book, The 4 Foundations of Golf, and the co-host of the Sweet Spot podcast. For many years, I was nothing close to a scratch golfer, and I never got a peek behind the curtain, and it really damaged my game. But now that I've reached this level and get to play with tons of other scratch golfers, I want to help solve one of golf's biggest challenges. Golfers at every level suffer with the same problem: mismanaged expectations. We all build these highlight fantasy reels in our brains of what better golf should look like, and when reality doesn't match that fantasy, we get frustrated, we spiral, and our scores unfortunately get worse. The idea of a scratch golfer has become kind of mythical. I know it did for me for a long time. There's even a running joke on the golf Twitter community about what's real scratch, because people assume that these players should be shooting under par from the tips every single time they tee it up. But that's not how it works. Let's clear this up because a lot of players don't know this. Your handicap is not your average score. It's actually a measurement of your potential, your best scores adjusted for the course difficulty. So a scratch golfer can, and often does, average as much as 2 to even 4 over par on a moderately difficult golf course. If you assume scratch golf means a flood of birdies and perfect ball striking, you're misunderstanding what the next level really looks like. I'm going to show you some stats that will likely shock you shortly. But I remember the first time that I got paired with a real scratch golfer in my 20s. He was a former Division I college golfer. He drove it well, hit really solid iron shots, and seemed completely in control of his game. But by the end of the round, I realized something. I couldn't really remember a singular incredible shot that he hit. He made a couple of routine birdies on par 5s, and I think he hit 1 iron close, but that was about it. He shot 2 under par, and it looked completely uneventful, boring even. Meanwhile, my round was a mixture of blow-ups and wild recoveries, pretty much a roller coaster. And that day started to change how I thought about golf, because what I saw wasn't magical. It was really a series of boring non-disasters. I realized then that the secret to golf was fewer mistakes, not more magic. Scratch golfers don't shoot low scores because they make a ton of birdies. They shoot lower scores because they avoid a bunch of double bogeys or worse, and yes, make a lot of routine pars and good bogeys. But let's look at the numbers to give you some perspective. Scratch golfers average about 2 birdies per round. Now a 10 handicap is going to average less than 1 birdie per round, and a 15 handicap is going to average less than half a birdie per round. That's not a huge gap if you do the math. But now let's look at double bogeys or worse. Scratch golfer is going to average only a quarter of double bogeys or worse per round, whereas a 10 handicap is going to be at 3, a 15 handicap goes up to 5, and a 20 handicap is making more than 7 double bogeys or worse per round. That's the difference. Not birdie explosions, it's mistake prevention. And the biggest thing that I've noticed over the years, better players rarely hit what I would call 2 bad shots in a row. They're going to make multiple mistakes every round, but they don't compound them. They know how to stop the bleeding, and that's worth way more than that 1 extra birdie. Now, to add more color to the discussion, I'm going to explore different statistical benchmarks in each part of the game. These are from the ShotScope database, which has millions of real shots from golfers around the world. I've also cross-referenced this with many of the other stat tracking companies, and they all hold up and show similar numbers. Let's start with tee shots. So here's another myth, that scratch golfers are going to hit tons of fairways. I bet if I polled most golfers, they would assume they're as high as 70 to 80% fairways hit per round. The truth, they average about 50%, and it's actually not that different than many 10 or 15 handicaps. The difference isn't fairway accuracy. It's distance and avoiding disaster. Now, scratch players are averaging more than 250 yards off the tee, and that gives them anywhere between a 20 to 40-yard advantage over most other amateur golfers. But even more importantly, their misses stay in play. They avoid what I call those uh-oh swings, those big misses where the ball goes out of bounds, into the water, a fairway bunker, or stuck in the trees. Now, they're picking smarter targets, and of course, they know how to hit more playable misses. And almost every scratch golfer that I've played with, they are hitting driver as often as possible. It's not that they're hitting lasers every single time in the middle of the fairway. They're simply in play and have an opportunity to advance the ball to the green. So keep in mind that to reach your next level of golf, it's not about hitting the fairway every single time. It's about limiting the big miss and finding ways to add distance. If you want to learn how to hit your driver well, you can check out the link in the description to this video. I have a free guide that shows all of the practice methods I've used to make my driver my favorite club in the bag when it used to be my most feared. But if you want to make the biggest leap in scoring, you have to focus on approach play. Mark Brody famously wrote in Every Shot Counts that approach play is where golfers of all levels separate the most from one another, whether it's a PGA Tour player to scratch or a 15 handicap to a 25 handicap. But there's an important distinction to make about what better iron play looks like. In our fantasies, we would love to be hitting it to 5 to 10 feet every single time and getting tons of birdie looks. Now, there are times where I've gotten hot with my approach shots, and yes, I've had a ton of these good looks at birdie from makeable range, but it's certainly not the norm in my game. Here are some proximity benchmarks for scratch golfers that likely should surprise you and, more importantly, give you perspective on your game. From 100 yards, their distance to the hole is about 30 feet. From 150, that goes all the way up to 45 feet. And from 200 yards, it's a whopping 78 feet. And more interesting to me, that from all distances, they're only hitting their shots inside of 15 feet 17% of the time. And those numbers are massively closer than all other handicap levels. You can pretty much double all of those proximity distances that I gave you for a 15 handicap. So what's the big difference? Well, I'm going to go back to the idea of boring efficiency. Scratch golfers are going to hit about 50% of their greens in regulation typically, or more. Now, that's really the only traditional statistic that correlates well with scoring. A 15 handicap is down to about 22% greens in regulation per round. But similar to tee shots, when scratch golfers do miss the greens, they're leaving themselves really straightforward wedge shots from closer distances. Now, when I get into wedge play numbers, you'll see that that doesn't mean an automatic up and down for par. Again, it really means far less double bogeys because they are mostly getting on the green and two putting for bogey at worst. So if you get to play with a scratch or plus handicap, you're probably going to get bored to death by a lot of two putts for par after they hit greens. Yes, they'll occasionally sprinkle in some tight shots to the pin, but you'll notice what I would call a lot of good misses on the fringe or the collar of the green. Now let's talk about wedge play, because I think this is a really misunderstood topic. If you ask most people what separates a scratch golfer, they would say, oh, they're getting it in tap-in range for par all the time when they miss greens. But if I told you that I've been a plus handicap the last several years while being fairly clueless with my greenside wedges, you likely wouldn't believe me. But it is true, and I'm desperately trying to fix it. Now, when you look at wedge play in general inside of 50 yards, it actually has the smallest influence on scoring behind putting, approach play, and tee shots. That's not to say wedge play is not important, but again, you should understand what the next level looks like, because you're probably making some assumptions that are just too lofty for your skill level. Here's the truth about scratch players and wedges. They're good, but they're not tour level magicians. Inside of 50 yards, the average shot finishes about 10 to 15 feet from the hole, which doesn't sound great, but it actually is quite good. And they're saving par just about 50% of the time. Compared to a PGA Tour player, they're at about 60 to 65% up and down. So again, that's not getting up and down for par every time, but it's good enough to make a lot of pars while avoiding the double bogeys. So if your benchmark is to hit it inside of 5 feet every time, that's just unrealistic. Real success with wedges is getting it on the putting surface more often to about that 10 to 20 foot range, where you're not going to three putt that often. Now, last but certainly not least is putting. There's no question that I had to make more putts to graduate from a single digit handicap to scratch and plus handicap level. It's definitely become one of the strengths of my game, and there are times when I can get hot with my putter, and make a decent amount of putts outside of 10 feet. But that's not the real story, it's more of the exception. Putting is actually quite simple. Scratch golfers just have much better speed control. And also they're typically way better at reading greens than other players also. Learning how to read greens effectively is actually one of the biggest separators in scoring, and that's why aim point has been so helpful to my game. Another system is called Tour Read that you can check out. So yes, scratch golfers are making more putts inside of 8 feet where you actually have a chance. But if you pay attention to the entirety of their game, it's going to be a lot of boring 2-putt pars. It's not a highlight reel like you see on PGA Tour broadcasts where 20-footers are going in the hole left and right. So why am I telling you all of this? Obviously, you know that golfers who are better hit it farther, closer, and 3-putt less. And for the longest time, I was not able to peek behind the curtain and get to play with golfers who were way better than me. But it was my assumptions of how they played that held me back in my game. Expecting way too much led to a bad attitude, poor decision making, and just a general feeling that I was never good enough at this game. And I know so many of you watching this video are stuck in that same cycle. But when you start to realize that even the top 1% have plenty of flaws and make plenty of mistakes per round, it can actually open up a door in your game. Now don't get me wrong, playing at this level is incredibly hard. I've put in my 10,000 hours and then some. But if you have aspirations of getting your handicap lower, whether that's down to a 5, 10, or 20, the story is mostly going to be the same. It's going to be less errant tee shots, a few more greens in regulation mixed in with some easier chip shots, and keeping your first putts within about 3 feet of the hole, which is good speed control and green reading. You have a far better chance of reaching your goals if you're not fantasizing about this spectacular golf game that doesn't even exist, and acknowledging what the next level really looks like. No magic, miracles, or gimmicks. Just steady efficiency, smarter decisions, and tempering your emotions when things inevitably get chaotic out there. As always, thanks again for making it to the end of my videos. I appreciate everyone who takes the time to listen to my information. And of course, you can like and subscribe to my channel. That helps me out a lot. And check out my book, The 4 Foundations of Golf, if you want to find ways to do everything I talked about in this video. And don't miss my last video where I give 10 habits that were absolutely killing my golf game and likely yours.